Good evening, just gone 7pm on Wednesday, the 27th of January 2021. My name's Toby Lepatty Mesme, and this is another edition of MesmePolitics. Thanks for joining. Coming up between now and 7:30 over the next half hour, we will be talking about the worrying new policy towards European immigrants that the government is bringing in. We'll be talking about Gordon Brown's thoughts on the economic crisis we face. We'll be looking over Joe Biden's first week as President of the United States. But first, let's talk about leaderless Britain. We have no political leaders willing to match up to the crises that we face. That is the state of affairs right now. Boris Johnson is criminally negligent, useless. His temperament is the opposite of the temperament you'd need in a Prime Minister. He's an opportunist. He's fallen upwards all his life. His entire persona and career are an indictment of the British establishment and debunk comprehensively the myth of meritocratic Britain, while at the same time he has presided over a response to coronavirus that should see him and every member of the government prosecuted for criminal negligence. At the same time, we have a Labour leader who is timid, who is courting the support of a media class that will only support him if he disavows anything his party and himself profess to stand for, who has been utterly toothless, has allowed the government to run away with the agenda in the middle of a huge crisis, and couldn't match up to someone like Attlee if he tried. We have a disastrous government, and we have a toothless, weak opposition, led by a careerist opportunist. Both careerist opportunists, Johnson obviously being more of a careerist opportunist. Keir Starmer has some shred of principle more than Boris Johnson. But we are where we are, both career politicians. Britain has no one willing to match up to the scale of crises that Britain and the world face. It has no one willing to level with the British public about the reality. Both parties are immersed in the myth-making of British history and the story of Britain. And we're in a pretty dire place for at least the next decade, possibly more. Britain is leaderless, and on that note, Keir Starmer has accused Boris Johnson of being too slow to implement a series of measures during the pandemic, as he piled pressure on the Prime Minister to explain why the UK's official COVID death toll had passed 100,000. Let's have a listen to Keir Starmer at PMQs.
The question on everyone's lips this morning is why? The Prime Minister must have thought about that question a lot. So can he tell us why he thinks that the United Kingdom has ended up with a death toll of 100,000, the highest number in Europe?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, like the right honourable gentleman, I mourn every death in this pandemic, and we share the grief of all those who have been bereaved, Mr. Speaker. And let him be in no doubt, and let the House be in no doubt, that I and the government take full responsibility for all the actions I have taken, we've taken during this pandemic to fight this disease. And yes, Mr. Speaker, there will indeed be a time when we must learn the lessons of what has happened, reflect on them and prepare, Mr. Speaker. I don't think that moment is now, when we are in the throes of fighting this wave of the new variant, when 37,000 people are struggling with COVID in our hospitals. And I think what the country wants is for us to come together as a parliament and as politicians, and to work to keep the virus under control, Mr. Speaker, as we are, and to continue to roll out the fastest vaccination programme in Europe. I think that is where the minds of the public are fixed.
Boris Johnson, as usual, completely allergic.
I welcome these measures, but
completely allergic to scrutiny during this. Completely, basically fobbed off Keir Starmer when he asked him what message would he give to bereaved families in the midst of this disastrous coronavirus situation. He essentially went on a rant about how because Labour apparently were holding them to account too much and they were being opportunistic. I mean, they are being opportunistic, but that's sort of the job of the opposition. And opposing the government isn't being opportunistic. The opportunism is Keir Starmer not having any convictions. The way to fix that is to oppose the government even more fervently, not come together when a government's presided over a disaster like this. Priti Patel has brought in new draconian border restrictions, except they're not really draconian enough to control the virus coming in. So it's, again, toothless. This is Yvette Cooper, chair of the Home Affairs Committee, questioning her.
I welcome these measures, but they don't go far enough to deliver a comprehensive system. We know the Brazil and South Africa variant have already been identified across several continents, and in the first wave, less than 1% of new cases came from China. The overwhelming majority from European countries the government said were low risk at that time. So can I ask the Home Secretary about the number of people likely to still be arriving who are not covered by quarantine hotels, still won't have to do further tests on arrival and will be able to go straight onto the public transport system from Heathrow or wherever they arrive? Can she confirm, is that likely to still be thousands of people each day? And does she think that is wise?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Right Honourable Lady for her question. I think, first of all, it's important, and I come back to this point, that all the measures, every measure that has been introduced across government has provided degrees of protection, various layers and levels of protection against transmission of the virus. The Right Honourable Lady has heard me say already that travel is down from 90% compared to this time last year. Clearly there are travel bans in place for countries that are red listed, and that'll continue. And the announcement today will also reduce the number of travelling passengers. I do want to emphasise that, because people should simply not be travelling. And we see the examples, Madam Deputy Speaker. I will call some of them out. I mean, Border Force have given me examples where even at St Pancras, people have been turning up with their skis. That is clearly not acceptable. We see plenty of influencers on social media showing off about which parts of the world that they are in, mainly in sunny parts of the world. Going on holiday is not an exemption, and it's important that people stay at home.
Hey, look at that. I agree with Priti Patel on something. The influencer stuff was ridiculous, wasn't it? I mean, that's obviously not what's fueling the spread of coronavirus, but, well, it partly is, but it's not at the same time. But still, sort of sickening in its ludicrosity to see influencers trying to claim that they're key workers in some form or another. So anyway, yes, hotel quarantine system targeted at arrivals from high-risk countries has been announced by the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, today after ministers met to sign off the more targeted approach. Boris Johnson rejected calls yesterday evening for a blanket policy, opting instead for imposing hotel quarantine on British citizens from a limited number of countries such as South Africa and Brazil. It's inadequate, wholly inadequate. I don't know why we can't just get tough on this. It's a government that fetishises borders and cutting immigration. That even they can't do it. Why can't we close the borders? Jacinda Ardern, with her Labour government in New Zealand, proper, tough, hardcore border regime to keep people out during this pandemic. It's what you have to do. I would very rarely advocate a draconian border policy, but in this case, it's the only time there's a morally justifiable case for a draconian border policy. Do it, right? Different countries don't have the capacity to detect strains, so what you're doing is unscientific. You want to stop strains coming in? You want to stop the virus coming in? Apply this, right? It's a decent measure. Apply this to all countries and ramp up enforcement. That's what you have to do. We should have done this in March last year. But, let's do it now. Let bygones be bygones. Should have done it 10 months ago. Do it now. Should have done it 11 months ago, really. It should literally have been done this time last year. But we are where we are. And we can't particularly change that. Meanwhile, Boris Johnson has said he hopes to begin reopening England's schools from Monday the 8th of March. and the date could be confirmed next month. He said a firm decision would be taken in the week of the 22nd of February after the spring half term, the date by which he had originally hoped schools would reopen. Let's hear a little bit of Johnson talking about when we will open our country.
But nor can we relax too soon, because if we do, we run the risk of our NHS coming under still greater pressure, compelling us to reimpose every restriction and sustain those restrictions for longer. So far, our efforts do appear to have reduced the R rate, but we do not yet have enough data to know exactly how soon it will be safe to reopen our society and economy. At this point, we don't have enough data to judge the full effect of vaccines in blocking transmission, nor the extent and speed with which the vaccines will reduce hospitalizations and deaths, nor how quickly the combination of vaccinations and the lockdown can be expected to ease the pressure on the NHS. What we do know is that we remain in a perilous situation, with more than 37,000 patients now in hospital with COVID, almost double the peak of the first wave. But the overall picture should be clearer by mid-February.
Now, my message to the government on all this is simply to, hold your horses. Don't be too ambitious on this. Don't push too much. They're sounding a little bit more sensible than they were, but we cannot be rash in opening up the economy. The opening up of schools, it's welcome they're not doing straight after half term. It still sounds a bit too hasty. We have to be double, triple sure that this isn't going to trigger another wave and we're going to have to go into another lockdown. If that means keeping us in lockdown for a few more months, we're going to have to live with the costs of that, mitigate the costs of that, and prioritise reopening schools as the very first thing that reopens, but only when it's safe. Because do you know what's even more disruptive for kids? Unlock, lock, unlock, lock. That's really bad. And it is becoming quite clear that the government is banking absolutely everything on the vaccine rollout. That might turn out to be a smart bet, but if that goes wrong, they're really in trouble. If it doesn't, it might be plain sailing into the summer. We'll see.
We will provide a programme of catch-up over the next financial year. And this will involve a further £300 million of new money to schools for tutoring. And we will work in collaboration with the education sector to develop, as appropriate, specific initiatives for summer schools and a COVID premium to support catch-up. But we recognise that these extended school closures have had a huge impact on children's learning, which will take more than a year to make up. So we will work with parents, teachers and schools to develop a long-term plan to make sure pupils have the chance to make up their learning over the course of this Parliament. We will provide a programme
Okay, so, it's true. The damage these lockdowns are inflicting are obviously dreadful in terms of the impact on children. Good to hear an extension of free school meal provisions and various things that should have been done ages ago to alleviate parents of the uncertainty, but the government's just sociopathic like that, Heading over to our dear friends in the United States, and it's Joe Biden's first week, pretty much completed now. How are we looking? Well, sorry about that. That triggered by mistake. We're not closing the show yet. Okay, so how are we looking? 1 week in to the Joe Biden presidency. How are things looking? Well, I've got a little list here. It's not great. So in Joe Biden's first 5 days, he lied about the $2,000 stimulus checks. He lied about the public healthcare option. He froze insulin and EpiPen rules that lowered prices. He's considering a multi-thousand troop surge in Iraq. He claims to own 1/3 of Syria and is stealing their oil. He claimed Juan Guaido is president of Venezuela. He appointed the who's who of war criminals and corporatists to his cabinet. He is maintaining colonial Trump policies in Puerto Rico. He won't rejoin the Iran deal without unreasonable amendments. He's maintaining murderous sanctions on Iran. And he invited the Venezuelan coup leader to the inauguration. Let's not forget, he lied about immediately forgiving some student loan debt. He lied about immediately ending support for the Saudi-led coalition in Yemen, which is the world's largest humanitarian crisis at the present time. And he created a migrant task force, but still hasn't freed the children in cages at the border. Oh dear. This is what all the pessimists thought. The pessimists were, of course, right. It was pretty likely they were going to be right. We're talking about Joe Biden, but what we see, particularly in terms of foreign policy, we'll get onto domestic policy in a second, is a return to the hideous normalcy, right? No progressive... People thought there might be a few progressive changes to foreign policy. As of right now, completely not. Some areas were going more hawkish than Trump. In some areas, we're staying as hawkish as Trump was. I've yet to see any reversals on Iran, on Saudi Arabia, on all these various things. Nothing yet. There was hope for that, but nothing yet. So it is a return to the complete hideous normality, right? No positive change. That's why I understand people not being enthusiastic about the Biden presidency. Who cares if a Democrat's in the White House? If the imperialist brutality perpetrated by the United States around the world continues, and it does. There were initial positive steps on the domestic front. When Biden came in, he was saying all the right things, but now we are heading for a repeat of 2009. We're reversing on things. We're looking duplicitous. I mean, the posturing on stimulus checks is bizarre and stupid and self-serving. It's what they were always going to do. If we have a repeat of 2009, 2022 will be a repeat of 2010. Republicans will seize back the agenda and they will sweep Democrats out of Congress. And it paves the way down the line for another Trump, another right-wing demagogue. That is what centrist Democrats are leaving the door open for right now, with their capitulation, their toxic compromise, and their refusal to use the procedures that are right in front of them to reform the system and to win. Let's have a listen to Chuck Schumer, Majority Leader, because he is saying something about legislation that is more positive than you'd hope. This is him talking to Rachel Maddow.
With the Affordable Care Act, the Republicans insisted that there not be any single-payer option, there not be a public option, right. Had to be based around the private insurance companies, and they insisted on all these changes that were made for them, and then they didn't vote for it anyway.
Right.
And on the immigration bill, they insisted that their priority, deportations, all that be done up front. President Obama did all that up front, and then they still didn't vote for it. We saw it in the Recovery Act as well. They insisted that the Recovery Act be made smaller and significantly less effective, and then they didn't vote for it anyway.
10 years it took to get, because it wasn't deep enough and strong enough. 10 years. We're not going to make that mistake with COVID.
But isn't the lesson there that it's not worth trying to get bipartisan legislation because it will weaken it and make it worse, and they're never going to vote for it anyway?
Our North Star has to be the legislation itself. It has to be big and bold and strong. If Republicans work with us to get good, strong legislation, yes. But I agree with you. I've made these arguments in numerous places. Look at 2008, where we spent a year and a half trying to get something good done, ACA, Obamacare, and we didn't do all the other things that had to be done. We will not repeat that mistake. We will not repeat that mistake.
See, that's reassuring, right? We're hearing out of Pelosi, Biden, Schumer. Schumer is definitely closer to saying the right things, right? We'll see. Will stuff get delivered? Right now, it looks like they're climbing down and everything, but, you know, we live in hope. It's a very complicated situation. Among other things, impeachment right now looks dead upon arrival. It looks like they might get 5 Republican votes, so any hope of that is down the drain, and it'll only distract from the Biden agenda. Of course, it has to be done to try and hold the guy to account, but it'll make great TV, but it doesn't look like it's going to stem any results. It is interesting that Democrats are more enthusiastic about impeachment than delivering for the American people. Biden's latest approval rating was around 63%. 63%. So Joe Biden's first presidential job approval rating has come in at 63%, according to a newly released Hill Harris X poll. Only 37% of respondents disapproved. An overwhelming 94% of Democrats approved, 62% of independents. It's not the first. It's being reported as the first. There was obviously that really dire poll, and then there was one slightly better after that. But this is about where Biden should be, I would say. It's where I initially thought it would be, 63%. We're getting on a roll now. That looks pretty positive, and that's good. Now, let's have a listen to Bernie Sanders with a warning of what Democrats face in 2022 if they don't deliver.
If Democrats don't pass these sweeping changes you're talking about, do you think that they will lose control of the House and Senate in 2022?
That's what history tells us. What history tells us is that when Clinton won in 92, 2 years later, the Democrats didn't do as much as they should have. They got swept out by the Republicans. Obama won in 2008, 2010. Republicans decimated them at the polling booths. Look, Donna, this is not complicated stuff. We're in an unprecedented moment in American history. Tens of millions of people are hurting. People are watching this program, do not have food in their cupboards to feed their kids. They are sick. They cannot afford to go to the doctor. They cannot afford the outrageously high cost of prescription drugs. They're worried about climate change and what that will mean for their kids and future generations. That is where we are right now. And the American people say, we elected you guys. Do something. Improve our lives. We are in pain. We are hurting. That's in red states, Republican states. It is in Democratic states. It is in rural America. It is in urban America. It is Black, white, Latino, Native American, Asian American. This is a country that is in pain right now. And if Democrats, who have slim majorities in the House and the Senate, we got President Biden in the White House, if we do not respond now, yes, I believe 2 years from now, the Republicans will say, hey, you elected these guys. They did nothing. Vote for us, and they will win.
Okay, absolutely right there from Bernie Sanders. What I think we need to see, what I increasingly think we need to see come 2022, and we need to see it build up from now, is a Tea Party type movement. Obviously nothing like the Tea Party, but Tea Party from the left, basically. Anti-establishment outsiders, genuinely, unlike the Tea Party, which were not. Anti-establishment outsiders, grassroots, coming in, primarying Democrats, trying to seize control, ride a wave into Congress in 2022. Basically running on the Democratic ticket, but running against the internal establishment of the Democratic Party. Basically talking to these constituents, look, we know they're shit. We're going to try and fix the party. Vote for us. And that will turn people out, I think. Because people see progressive Democrats delivering and holding to their word and holding to what they say. I think that could be a very potent political force. And the Tea Party tells us you can run against your own party, win, and eventually basically get a presidential nominee who's signed on to most of your priorities elected into the White House. It'll be a much steeper road for the left because the left doesn't have big money behind it. But has to be done. Finally, let's hear Joe Biden yesterday signing executive orders on racial equity.
At the moment it arrived as a nation where we face deep racial inequities in America and systemic racism that has plagued our nation for far, far too long. I said that over the course of the past year that the blinders have been taken off the nation, the American people. What many Americans didn't see or had simply refused to see couldn't be ignored any longer. Those 8 minutes and 46 seconds that took George Floyd's life opened the eyes of millions of Americans and millions of people around all over the world. It was the knee on the neck of justice, and it wouldn't be forgotten. It stirred the conscience and of tens of millions of Americans. And in my view, it marked a turning point in this country's attitude toward racial justice. When the six-year-old daughter, Gianna, who I met with when I met with the family, I leaned down to say hi to her, and she said, looked at me, she said, "Daddy changed the world." That's what Gianna said, his daughter. Daddy changed the world. And I believe she was right. Not because this kind of injustice stopped, it clearly hasn't, but because the ground has shifted, because it's changed minds and mindsets, because it laid the groundwork for progress. COVID-19 has further ripped a path of destruction through every community in America, but no one has been spared. But the devastation in communities of color has been nothing short of stunning. Just look at the numbers. 40% of frontline workers, nurses, first responders, grocery store workers, are Americans of color, and many are still living on the edge. 1 in 10 Black Americans is out of work today. 1 in 11 Latino Americans is out of work today. 1 in 7 households in America, about 1 in 4 Black, 1 in 5 Latino households in America, report that they don't have enough food to eat in the United States of America. Black and Latino Americans are dying of COVID-19 at rates nearly 3 times that of white Americans. And it's not white Americans' fault, but just a fact. And the Americans now know it, especially younger Americans. One of the reasons I'm so optimistic about this.
Now, it's the right words from Joe Biden. We wait for the actions. We await the actions. Back over to Britain. This is unsettling. So, EU citizens are being offered financial incentives to leave the UK. That's according to The Guardian. This is months before the deadline to apply for settled status. So from the 1st of January, EU citizens have quietly been added to the government's voluntary return scheme, where financial support is offered as an encouragement to return to their country of origin. Payments can include flights and up to £2,000 resettlement money. The scheme is designed to help some migrants in the UK to leave voluntarily. People working to help vulnerable EU citizens in the UK said the offer of money to return home contradicted the government's claim that it was doing everything it could to encourage people to register for settled status. The deadline for Europeans living in the UK to apply for the EU settlement scheme is the 30th of June. Benjamin Morgan, who runs the EU Homeless Rights Project at the Public Interest Law Centre, said it is clear from our casework that some of the most vulnerable EU citizens are yet to resolve their status. Barriers to application and delays in Home Office decision-making remain significant factors. This mixed messaging around settled status on the other hand, and voluntary returns on the other, seriously undermines the government's claim that the rights of vulnerable Europeans will be protected post-Brexit. Well, this is yet another British National Party policy from years gone by that has been regurgitated, moderated here and there, and spat out as Tory party policy in the year 2021. I'm not even joking, and I don't care what the fine print here is, the small print. The reality is, we all know what this does, right? It is a covert message. When people see this, EU citizens here see this, it is a covert message that you're not welcome here. You don't belong here. And people hear it. And it makes people fear for their livelihoods, it makes people fear for their safety. That's what the government's doing. However they dress it up, at its core, emotionally, that's what they're doing here. Quite horrendous. And we hear about this on Holocaust Memorial Day. At the same time, we hear the government doing everything it can to stop helping refugees, all as Boris Johnson waxes lyrical about learning the lessons and the compassion of Britain during the Holocaust. It's bullshit, right? We're not compassionate. Have you seen what we're doing right now? If you really want to learn the lessons from the Holocaust, if you really want to show compassion, then take in refugees. Then care for people right now in desperate situations around the world that want to come to Britain. We talk about the kinder transport, but nowadays, Johnson, Farage, if the kinder transport was today, they'd be arguing, don't let them come in. They're all going to commit crimes or sponge off welfare or something ridiculous like that. Watch it, right? It's true. That's where we are. Someone says EU students apparently asked to pay £1,000 health surcharge when applying for visa, then claim it back. Absolutely shameful. Yeah, all shameful. All shameful. Another shameful development. I mean, we're all doing it, but the EU seems to have gone off on some sort of vaccine nationalism sort of rant. So that's great. Final story of the day, Gordon Brown. He's called for emergency measures to support businesses in the budget after new research from the London School of Economics warned almost 1 million UK companies were at risk of failure in the next 3 months. Ideology is holding this government back. It's holding the Labour Party back. None of them have the ambition to face up to these problems. The economy is in dire straits. The Tories are out of ideas. Labour are out of ideas. We're in for a long spell of painful ramifications from this economic crisis, longer than necessary, thanks to the small-mindedness and neoliberal logic of the political class. It's just gone 7:30. I'm Toby Lepati Mesme. This has been MesmePolitics. Please subscribe and turn notifications on. Tell a friend. We will be back, same time, same place, to do it all over again tomorrow. Get me on Twitter @TobyJoshuaUK for all the latest of my hot takes on politics here and in the States, or get my twice daily 2-minute reads on Medium. I'm @TobyJoshuaPolitics. I've been Toby Lepati Mesme. You've had all the latest in UK and US politics for today from a unique leftist perspective. Thanks for getting involved. Like the video, subscribe, notifications on, tell your friends, and I'll see you soon.